The coast of Mozambique belongs to giants. From the leviathans that visit each winter, to the resident whale sharks that feed here year-round. But a closer look reveals a tiny, secretive world few have explored.
While most people come to Mozambique to see these big megafauna species, they don't realize that there's this whole other life going on in the shallows. Tiny little species that get overlooked.
They deserve just as much protection and attention as the bigger guys. They're just as rare and just as important to ecosystems.
In this land of giants, the smallest creatures must find a way to survive on this wild and unpredictable coast. It's winter in Mozambique, along Africa's southern coast. And the humpback whales have arrived from Antarctica. Each year, hundreds make the 4,000-mile journey north to mate and breed in these warmer waters.
Sometimes you see the humpbacks while you're diving, sometimes you don't, but you can always hear them.
The male humpback whale's song is one of the longest and most complex of any animal. A single call can last up to 30 minutes. Once it's over, the whale will start again, repeating the same song over and over. The song travels far underwater. Researchers believe some of these low-frequency sounds can be heard more than 10,000 miles away. These are some of the loudest sounds made by any animal on the planet.
It rumbles in your soul. It's very beautiful. It's very special.
Why male humpback whales sing remains a mystery to researchers. It's possible males sing to attract females, or as a display of dominance over competing suitors. One thing is certain: the whale's communication is vital to their survival. Every winter, Nakia Colleen studies the humpbacks that migrate here to learn how they use this coast.
We do humpback surveys, so we climb up to the top of a sand dune and we do scans. On the half an hour, we do minimum 4-minute scan, and we record all of the behavior, the numbers, we map it as well. We're getting an idea of how many there are, how they're using our bay, and what they're doing.
Nakia's research station, Zevra Marine Lab, sits on a remote stretch of coastline in southern Mozambique, hugging the Indian Ocean. The humpbacks come to Mozambique's warmer waters to mate, then go off to breed during winter. Humpback whale season may be the most exciting time for researchers and tourists. But away from the deep blue, there's another world worth exploring. And Nakia refuses to let the little species go unnoticed. The shallow reefs, the estuaries, and the mangroves are filled with tiny creatures, some smaller than a match head.
find tons of macro life in our inshore, offshore reefs, but also in lagoons, estuaries, mangroves. There's a whole bunch of ecosystems here in Mozambique that inhabit a lot of macrofauna.
While the humpbacks are mating offshore, so too is one of Mozambique's smallest and strangest residents. But getting to them isn't easy. Research in the shallows is governed by the turn of the tide. Nakia and her team have a short 1 to 2 hour window, just twice a month, to study these secretive creatures. When the tide is at its lowest, a rocky shoreline reveals itself as the ocean retreats from the bay. For 3 hours, tiny marine life is left stranded inside the water-filled grooves and pores of the rock face. Each little pool is alive with barnacles and small fish. Seaweed carpets the rocks.
We're really lucky in Zavra because on top of having our little small pools that are exposed at the low tide, we have this much larger pool that we can sample in, larger than a typical swimming pool and up to 3 meters deep. So it's quite large, and it allows us to sample this diverse marine life in this constricted area.
The giant rock pool allows Nakia to reach her quarry. Nudibranchs, brightly colored slugs we know little about. Zevra Lab runs the most extensive study on nudibranchs in the country. Its database includes more than 200 species, 90% of which are newly discovered in Mozambique.
It makes it really special to go out and look for these guys. It's just fascinating, these species that not many people are studying or researching or caring about.
There are more than 3,000 species of nudibranchs. At Zavra Lab alone, 30 new species have been found and scientifically described in the last 8 years. Many of those were discovered here, in the rock pool. But there's a challenge. The same tide that grants them access to the pool also restricts their survey time.
We rely heavily on the tides in order to enter the rock pool, which gives us a very small window within a month.
The rock pool is 650 feet offshore. Powerful waves make it too dangerous to swim out to it at high tide, so they must wait until the tide recedes. But even a normal low tide is not enough, which is why the pool is only accessible for 2 hours, twice a month. This is due to the elliptical path the moon follows as it orbits the Earth. As the moon revolves around the Earth, it exerts a gravitational pull. When the moon is closer to the Earth, the force is stronger, creating a higher tide. When the positions of the moon and sun align, the gravitational pull from both combine to create extra strong tides. This extremely low tide twice a month allows the team to walk out to the pool. With a short window to search the entire rock pool, finding these crafty slugs is no easy feat. Most of the nudibranchs that live here are no larger than the size of a pinky finger, and many are experts at camouflage. The team will have to work fast to beat the tide. Locals not fortunate enough to own a fishing boat also take advantage of the exposed bay. They carefully inspect each rock for mussels and other shellfish, and pick them off one by one. For others, the extreme low tide presents an opportunity for fishing. They will stay out to find food for their families for as long as the tide permits. Nakia treads carefully past the smaller pools on this porous coastline. But the current is strong. She struggles to cross. As water forces its way through deeper trenches, sharp rocks, slippery weeds, and powerful waves delay her crossing. Finally, she reaches the rock pool. The struggle was worth it.
It's almost like a miniature coral reef in there that you wouldn't expect to see when you're standing on shore looking at this giant rock. And once you enter it, it's a whole new world. There's so much life that you're always finding new things every time you go in there.
Today, Nakia has little time to admire the beautiful surroundings. Getting here has cost her nearly an hour. She now has just 60 minutes to survey the 650-foot pool in search of creatures, most of which are smaller than a fingernail and are experts at camouflage. Nudibranchs range in length from a fraction of an inch to an entire foot. Their jelly-like bodies are canvases that bear some of the most fascinating patterns and colors of any animal on Earth. Some nudibranchs use their vibrant hues for camouflage. Others display bright colors as a warning sign to would-be predators, an indication that the slugs are poisonous. There are two main types of nudibranchs. Dorid nudibranchs breathe through a plume of gills on their back end. Aeolid nudibranchs have finger-like appendages called serrata that cover their back. These appendages are used for breathing, digesting food, and for self-defense. Both types of nudibranch arm themselves with poison by eating toxic animals. Though Dorid nudibranchs can't sting, they can absorb toxins from food, like sponges and coral. The slugs are able to store these toxins in their extremities and release them to ward off attackers. Nudibranchs evolved from sea snails and developed these defenses when they lost their protective shell. Nudibranch means naked gills, describing the feathery bouquet that protrudes from their backside. These ornate plumes of gills enable them to absorb oxygen from the water. Some guard their gills with a sacrificial appendage that hangs over top. Better for a predator to attack the decoy than the delicate organ it protects. This nudibranch is laying eggs, a ribbon-like spiral of as many as 1 million ova. Nudibranchs are hermaphrodites. They reproduce by fertilizing one another's eggs. Since they possess both male and female organs, nudibranchs can mate with any other mature member of their species, maximizing their chances to conceive. After mating, each of the partners will lay eggs. If conditions are right, nudibranchs can mate year-round. But Nakia believes this is the time of year they're most active. She's eager to document some mating pairs to validate the findings from past years and prove there is some seasonality to the nudibrank's breeding behavior. She enlists the help of one of her volunteers, Marie, to cover as much ground as quickly as possible.
We'll enter the rock pool, we'll start our stopwatch, and every time we find a nudibranch, we'll stop the timer, and that way we get an idea of how much time it's taking to find each nudie.
Nakia and Marie scour the rock pool. After 6 minutes, they find one. It's a Hypsilodorus, often called a painted nudibranch for its vivid colors. A sprinkle of dark blue and yellow dots decorates its body. The vibrant colors suggest this nudibranch is armed with toxins. Nudibranchs use a pair of antenna-like horns on their head to scout out food. These are called rhinophores, Greek for nose carriers. And just like a nose, the rhinophore is used to smell. Nudibranchs are blind to their own beauty and to their surroundings. They rely on smell alone to hunt and to navigate their way through tricky terrain, like the edge of this rocky outcrop. This nudibranch stretches out in the hope of bridging itself onto another piece of substrate. Its horns move about like antennae, but they don't detect an easy way across, so the nudibranch turns back around. On its rear is its plume of 8 gills, through which this tiny slug breathes. These little nudibranchs can grow up to 1.5 inches in length. This one, at merely a fraction of an inch, has a long way to go.
Once we find a nudie, we measure it, we identify what substrate it's on, the depth it's at, and whether it's doing any behavior, so if it's mating or feeding.
Nakia completes the measurements, and Marie goes in for a photo ID.
The photographs are really useful because we bring them back to the lab and use them as a reference to kind of figure out what the actual species is.
Nakia is familiar with this Dorid nudibranch and makes fast work of recording the information. Nakia and Marie restart their watches, and the race to find the next species resumes. Nakia's next find is a tessellated Helgerda nudibranch, named for its intricate mosaic pattern. Bright yellow geometric ridges decorate its brown polka dot body. The sea slug is just 1.5 inches in length. But under a macro lens, an unwelcome guest makes it look like a giant. This nudibranch is host to an ectoparasite, a tiny copepod. Despite its size, the parasite can do a lot of damage. Research shows that infected nudibranchs produce up to 50% fewer eggs. Nakia and Marie spot several other sea slugs. This black and gold sap-sucking slug shares many characteristics with nudibranchs. It produces a distasteful secretion to protect itself from predators. And similar to nudibranchs, its bright coloration is a warning to hunters. But this slug doesn't have a plume of exposed gills, a distinctive feature of a nudibranch. It's a good day for Marie and Nakia. They managed to find 6 different species, including a mating couple. But all the species are re-sightings.
You go out hoping to find new species, and the conditions make it really difficult. The water starts filling back up and pushing us out of the rock pool, which can be quite dangerous because there's a lot of sharp rocks, barnacles. You can cut yourself very easily and hurt yourself.
Their time has run out. The bay is quickly filling up. The team must hurry back. So must the locals. The tide dictates not only Nakia's research, but also the livelihood of the people that live on this coast. An estimated 2/3 of Mozambique's population. More than 300,000 people here rely on small-scale coastal fisheries to survive. Fish accounts for nearly half the country's diet. Those who collect mollusks and fish at low tide practice sustainable fishing. They only catch enough to provide food for their families. But not all local fishermen abide by the law. As the tide comes in, the boats go out, armed with illegal gill nets that are hung vertically in the water and designed to trap fish by their gills. These nets are one of the most dangerous threats to marine life, both big and small, on this coast.
Here in Mozambique, we do see some gill netting right off of our coast, specifically right off the rock pool.
Locals net this contained area, catching all the life that's already been trapped by the tide. This method of fishing isn't selective. Many of the animals caught in the net are killed but never eaten. Smaller fish are the target, but it's the capture of coastal giants that's drawn attention to this destructive fishing practice. Gill nets are set up along the migration routes of Mozambique's largest animals. Destructive fishing practices along this coast impact both the largest and the smallest of Mozambique's marine creatures. And it's hard to save those you don't see. Farther up the coast, 70 miles north of Zavra, is Tofo Beach. Here, macro enthusiast Frida Haraldson fights a similar battle to try to raise awareness about the tiny species that are often overlooked.
A lot of people focus on conservation when it comes to larger species, very iconic species, whether it's on land or in the ocean, but it's easy to forget about the small things. Bottom dwellers like crustaceans are definitely threatened, and it's a shame it's just not coming more into the light.
Frida is the head scuba instructor at Peri Peri Divers.
For me, this coastline is super special. I haven't managed to drag myself from here for 7 years. There's so much diversity. You get drawn here because of stories of whale sharks and mantas. Then there's the whole world of macro that you didn't expect. You never know what you might see.
Each time Frida takes a group diving is an opportunity to change someone's mind.
People come here to see big things because that's what this region is known for, which is brilliant, and there's lots of lovely big things here. But the macro here is just so fascinating. It's great to have an encounter with a manta ray, but when you discover a new little species, and also just the thrill of actually looking for that thing and then finally finding it, that's why I just find it so much more rewarding.
Frida's keen eye for spotting macro life on the reef sets her apart from most divers. Unlike Nakia, Frida doesn't work within a contained environment like the rock pool. She must locate the macro critters on the offshore reefs they share with Mozambique's giants.
Keeping track of smaller things is, obviously a lot more difficult than the bigger things. It's harder to spot them, first of all. Then also, they might have habitats where they're a little bit more hidden, and so it's quite difficult to estimate populations in the same way.
but you can find them if you know where to look.
A lot of the smaller things tend to have a particular habitat they belong to, so then I do have lots of little places I know. So it's quite nice that you can keep track of them in that sense.
Many macro critters use other organisms for protection. Sea cucumbers, urchins, and anemones often play host to these tiny tenants. Sea cucumbers come in different shapes and sizes, depending on what part of the world they live in. Some can grow as long as 10 feet. They're the street sweepers of the ocean. They creep along the seabed, collecting minute particles of food. Crustaceans, some smaller than a fingernail, make it their job to clean this cleaner. These tiny guests pick algae and parasites off the skin of their host in exchange for a hiding place and a lift. This commensal shrimp is the ultimate hitchhiker. Other species, like the zebra crab, hook their barbed feet onto sea urchins, seeking protection among their spines. On Tofo's reefs, the crustaceans seem to favor anemones as hosts. This fanned appendage belongs to the peacock tail shrimp, also known as a clown partner shrimp, for its tendency to share its home with the clownfish. Its inch-long, partially transparent body blends into the anemone. Large white spots decorate its back. The shrimp has a special mucus coating that protects it from the sting of its host. It's actually the anemone that secretes the coating. As with most crustaceans, this tiny shrimp must molt its exoskeleton in order to grow. When it does, the shrimp will be vulnerable to predators and to its host's sting. It will need to fend for itself on the reef until a new exoskeleton grows, and the shrimp can once again approach its host anemone to cover its body with the protective mucus. The harlequin crab faces the same life and death challenge. As the walls of its host, a tube anemone, blow in the current, the crab is exposed for a few brief moments at a time. For now, it's safe, until it needs to leave to scavenge for food. A pair of porcelain crabs devises the perfect safety strategy. They eat from the comfort of their protective home. The current acts as a food delivery service, bringing plankton to their doorstep. The crabs extend their front arms out from the anemone to collect the food. If they lose a limb to an opportunistic predator, it will regenerate after a few molts. Feather-like appendages attached to its front arms reach into the current to filter the passing water and trap the plankton. This technique allows the porcelain crabs to stay protected by the anemone's stinging tentacles and feed at the same time. For this crab, safety is the main priority. This female is carrying as many as 1,600 eggs in a brood flap below her abdomen.
Just getting a glimpse of these creatures' lives, it's just that really lovely feeling. When I'm down there, it's just such a nice getaway. You can hover perfectly just above them, and it's like you're just sitting there like a little fly on the wall and just watching them in their normal environment, what they get about to, because they don't really mind that you're there.
While many of the reef's animals seek partnerships with larger organisms for protection, others use color and pattern to blend in or to stand out. A radiantly colored shrimp rests on the sandy bottom, unprotected by an anemone. But this harlequin shrimp is no pushover. Despite its tiny size, the inch-long crustacean is a fierce predator. Harlequin shrimp hunt in pairs. Starfish are their favorite prey. Once they have their target, the shrimp work together. One shrimp uses its claws to clip the starfish's feet, detaching it from the seabed, while the other flips it on its back. These ferocious little predators are also known to drag prey back to their lair, where they will feed on it for days, sometimes for weeks, all while the starfish is still alive. Harlequin shrimp have few natural predators of their own. Their brightly spotted bodies serve as a red flag of toxicity to attackers. But these mesmerizing hues and patterns attract another predator: humans.
A lot of people want these magnificent-looking shrimp like the harlequin shrimp, and people seem to forget that they're also under threat by the aquarium trade.
At the moment, Frida sees these macro species regularly on her dives, in their same hiding places, time and time again.
If they keep on coming back to the same place, it looks like it's a lot of them around. It seems that they're doing quite well at the moment, at least.
The same can't be said for another species, also targeted for the aquarium trade: the seahorse. Unlike the reef's macro creatures, which are safeguarded by deep water and a 10-minute boat ride, the seahorses here are unprotected. Their home is a shallow lagoon within the estuary, an environment easily accessible to humans and constantly threatened by humans.
They're used for the aquarium trade and traditional medicine, so dead or alive, these seahorses are worth a lot of money.
Every year, more than 150 million seahorses are killed for the traditional medicine trade alone. In some Chinese cultures, seahorses are believed to cure a variety of ailments, from heart and kidney disorders to impotence, even though there is no evidence to suggest they have any medicinal value. Hong Kong is the center of the trade. Demand is so high that dried seahorses sell for as much as $1,400 per pound. In 2014, customs officers in Hong Kong seized 150 pounds of dried seahorses from Mozambique. That's nearly 35,000 seahorses.
What we're trying to do is monitor these populations and hopefully get some sufficient data to support their status and hopefully help their populations here. We specifically come here to study the seahorses. They are data deficient here in Mozambique, so we don't really know how their populations are doing, although we do suspect that they're declining.
To study Mozambique's seahorses, in the estuary's lagoon, Nakia and her team are once again at the mercy of the tide.
We try and enter the lagoon in between tides. We want to stay consistent with our protocol, so we enter at the same spot and we swim in the same direction and then come back in the same direction to maximize our search time and survey the habitat. Our surveying in the lagoon is very shallow, so not more than 2 meters. In these shallower environments, we really have to get our buoyancy under control. We don't want to disturb these species that you might not see, that are hiding in the sand.
This pair of eyes belongs to a flounder, one of the reef's best camouflaged fish. But it wasn't born this way. For the first few weeks of life, flounders look and act like typical fish fry. Eventually, one eye migrates to the other side of its body to join the other, as the fish metamorphosizes to begin life as a bottom-dwelling young adult. Then the flounder settles to the seabed, where it's skillfully camouflaged, with both eyes facing up and above the sand. Not all hiding techniques are this extreme. The spearing mantis shrimp simply ducks inside a burrow. Others blend in against blades of seagrass. Nikia's seahorses are also experts in camouflage. They're capable of changing color and growing filaments to blend into their environment. And she and Marie have just 90 minutes to find them.
It can be quite tough. Some of them are quite small. They tend to wrap themselves around eelgrass blades, and it can make it difficult because they kind of hide within the grass. We try and be as observant as we can be. You know, you see it, and then you look away, and it's gone, and you're, where did it go? So you really have to keep an eye on it, and you have to be very attentive to what's around.
Finally, they've got one. It's a male giraffe seahorse, identified by its short snout and a horn-like eye spine.
We first take as many photos as we can so we can identify them as individuals. So one person will photograph, the other person will measure, and will record the size, the sex, what substrate it's attached to, the depth that we found it at. If it's a pregnant male.
Seahorses are the only species with a true reversed pregnancy. The female transfers her eggs to the male, where they're fertilized in his pouch. The seahorse's face looks kind of like a horse's. It has the prehensile tail of a monkey and the brood pouch of a kangaroo. And yet, it is a fish. But unlike most fish, the seahorse's body isn't streamlined to glide through the water. Instead, it relies on a dorsal fin that beats 30 to 70 times a second to propel the animal forward. Pectoral fins on either side of its head help with steering and stability. As a result, seahorses are very poor swimmers and spend most of their time gripping onto grasses to prevent themselves from being washed away by strong currents and waves. There are 54 known species of seahorses worldwide. 7 known species live here in Mozambique. Nikia inputs information about each seahorse she discovers into a database to monitor the population and behavior of each species. Today, Nikia and Marie have spotted just 2 seahorses, compared to last month's more successful survey of 5.
I find it very important to study the populations here and hopefully get some published work out there to allow their status to be more known. They're vulnerable, beautiful, interesting creatures that I think are neglected in the data world.
The Seahorses Lagoon is just one part of a larger estuary. Here, freshwater rivers meet salty seas, creating one of the most productive environments on Earth. Thousands of species, from birds to fish, depend on this habitat. Lesser flamingos pick algae and crustaceans from the shallows. Many species of fish rely on this habitat to spawn and nurse their young. And entire ecosystems hinge on its services. Seagrass beds line its shallow bottom, and mangroves skirt its edges, serving as a buffer zone between land and sea. Water draining downstream carries nutrients, sediments, and pollutants to the estuary. This runoff water flows through marshes, which act as filters to create clean, clear water. The estuary also provides habitat protection. Eelgrasses and mangroves reduce wave action and stabilize sediment, so its inhabitants can not only survive, but thrive. Underwater Africa's Callum Murray works to protect the estuary and its part-time dwellers, the juvenile fish.
We do surveys to examine how many different types of fish there are, how much of each of these species there are, how these species interact, where they live. Once we gain an understanding of this and a full understanding of the animal's niche, which is all the conditions that an animal needs to live within an environment, then we can protect them a lot better. We pass this information onto the fisheries department and onto the local communities in order to give them the information they require to put their own conservation practices in place.
Currently, the biggest threat to the estuary is the use of mosquito nets for fishing. Malaria, transmitted through the bite of an infected mosquito, is a serious threat to the people of Mozambique. Mosquito nets are common and far cheaper than traditional fishing nets, but they are a poor substitute. The fine mesh catches the tiny juvenile fish before they reach maturity, a process that happens here in the estuaries and the mangroves.
They are where juvenile fish go to hide out and grow up to a size where they can defend themselves. Some species will move out to pelagic environments, some will go to reefs, but these mangroves are where it all starts. And by protecting them, we should be providing the fuel that these reefs need to keep going and keep supporting the local communities. It's about being sensible and putting proper management in place that still allows people to go out and fish and make a living, but in a way that doesn't impact future generations.
Locals have harvested reef fish, shellfish, and crustaceans in these waters for centuries. For these fishermen, maintaining healthy marine life is a matter of survival. Each week, Callum and a team of volunteers survey the mangroves and estuaries. They travel in traditional fishing vessels called dhows. The journey takes several hours and considerable planning. Once again, the researchers are guided by the turn of the tide.
The estuary is like a massive sink, so once it starts to drain and the tide drops, the current just picks up and picks up and picks up. So that's quite a constraint when you're trying to do field work and you're just being flown along in a ton of current. These things all act to limit our research, but it's a challenge that we enjoy and we have to think through, and it adds to a more meaningful kind of result when you get it.
Callum and his volunteers will take photos and videos of the animals they encounter, along with any behavior they observe. The inhabitants of the estuary have adapted to life in these sandy shallows. A cockatoo waspfish, just 5 inches long, takes shelter behind a rocky outcrop. Others, like the hermit crab, wear their protection on their back. The shell serves as a portable home for the crab, and the barnacles on the shell get free transportation. Hunters, like the frogfish, blend in with rocks and corals to ambush prey. More active predators, like eels, slither through the seagrass. Some use their shape and color to expertly blend in with the environment.
We identify all the animals, go through all the data that we've tracked, so where they're living, what they're doing, and then we have a look and put them into our database of all the different species that we've ever found, and we have a look at their conservation status around the world. If they're critically endangered or in concern around the world, we can use this information to add extra weight to our argument that these areas deserve special protection.
So far, just one area of the estuary has received marine protection status. A small victory for the tiny creatures that live there. But there's still a lot of work to be done. What happens to these tiny animals in the mangroves, the lagoons, and the shallow reefs of Mozambique is important. Every juvenile caught at the lagoon is a fish that doesn't make it to the reef. That doesn't become prey for larger fish. That doesn't energize a much greater ecosystem.
This place is just so unbelievably special that the only option for me is to try and see this entire coastline of southern Mozambique protected. We need to convince people here of the quality of the resource that they have, how other locations in the world have used this resource to their benefit, and how Mozambique itself can grow on the back of such an incredible resource.
It's unique, it's diverse, and it provides us an opportunity to go out and look for and discover these new species.
You just see new things every day. It's just such an amazing feeling.
On this untamed coast, where time is marked by powerful tides that uncover fascinating ecosystems, marine researchers will continue to fight for the tiny creatures that live their lives in the shadow of giants.